Before history had a name, the world was quiet. Dawn moved across the horizon like a slow exhale, touching waves that had never been charted, slipping over shores no one had yet claimed. There were no flags, no borders, no nations carved into memory, only wind and salt and the hush of a planet still young enough to wonder what it would become. On those forgotten coasts, waves told stories that never found ink, footprints washed away before anyone could remember them. A fire might have burned on a distant cliff, seen by no one except the sea itself. We believe time began with writing, with monuments, with stone, yet the earth lived long before anyone recorded it. Imagine the first people to stand at the edge of an unending ocean, not knowing where water ended or whether it ended at all. They watched birds vanish into a horizon that had no name. They felt tides pull like distant voices. No maps guided them. No kingdom awaited them. They simply stood between land and water, and perhaps, on some night when the moon was low and confidence outweighed fear, they stepped into the waves with nothing but instinct to hold on to. We picture early humans as fragile, as bound to soil, as unsure. But what if they were braver than we can comprehend? What if the first journey across the sea happened when the world was still half told? All we know now are fragments, and even those feel like echoes. Archaeology starts where the ocean permits, where land has not yet swallowed evidence, where memory did not rot beneath rain. But there is a stillness beneath accepted history, an impression that something came before the story we inherited. A civilization could rise and vanish without leaving more than a scrap of bone or the memory of a tool rusted into earth. We build certainty from what survived, never from what was lost. Yet the world is wider than our records. Coastlines drowned when ice melted. Forests grew over hearthstones. Storms consumed boats made from reeds and hope. Entire chapters may lie beneath silence, waiting like shells beneath sand. In this quiet opening, we do not claim answers. We open a door. Standing before that door, we feel how large the unknown truly is, how much the ocean keeps to itself. There is a heavy calm in recognizing that truth. History is not the beginning of humanity, only the point where someone finally wrote down what was left. Everything before that moment floats in shadow, in speculation, in possibility. If someone crossed oceans before civilization learned to speak, the waves would have carried their story, and the tides would have erased it again. And yet, some questions do not fade. They linger like tide foam on morning stone, refusing to disappear completely. If we look closely, we may find cracks in the grand timeline we were taught. The next step is to examine those cracks, to tilt the world slightly and ask what slipped through. History appears solid when viewed from a distance. We are taught dates, empires, inventions arranged like stones in a straight road. Yet when we walk closer, the path breaks into fragments. Every timeline we trust is stitched together from what survived long enough to be found. Pottery, bones, a charcoal stain in soil, a necklace buried under collapsed sand. These remnants are not the story, only the pieces that endured decay, flood, and forgetting. The rest has disappeared, and in that silence, we build our confidence. Archaeology, despite its brilliance, studies what death allowed to remain. A single bone may shape an entire theory. A broken pot might define a century. An absence of evidence becomes a conclusion, even when absence is often coincidence, not truth. Imagine a library where nearly every book is ash, and scholars rebuild history from a few half-burned pages. That is our timeline. We speak of civilization as though it began when writing appeared, but writing merely froze a moment that would otherwise melt. For every artifact displayed in a museum, thousands dissolved into riverbeds, shattered in earthquakes, or vanished under rising seas. The world we think we know rests on what refused to rot. Perhaps that should comfort us, or perhaps it should unsettle us, the way a missing chapter leaves meaning uncertain. Occasionally, something emerges that should not exist, and the timeline trembles. A site older than expected, a tool too advanced for its assigned age, a skeleton where no migration should have reached. Each time, the narrative stretches to accommodate it, or the discovery is quietly criticized, delayed, forgotten. Not because evidence is weak, but because the story was comfortable before the interruption. We do not erase anomalies, yet we rarely let them rewrite the script. Instead, they wait in academic footnotes like unanswered questions, patient and persistent. Consider how many civilizations may have lived and died in the spaces history does not measure. Entire cultures could rise beside oceans, build their lives, trade, worship, and vanish without leaving more than dust and rumor. We assume humanity advances in steps, from simple to complex, but complexity may have bloomed and withered many times. Our modern certainty depends on what remained, not on what existed. Bones preserve only under perfect soil. Clay survives where rain was kind. Wood disappears almost instantly. A seafaring people who left few monuments might never enter textbooks. A maritime culture could cross oceans, trade, teach, and be erased by a single century of storms. We speak confidently of the first farmers, the first builders, the first navigators. Yet each first is merely the oldest evidence we found, not necessarily the beginning. If a pot survives 10,000 years, we say pottery began then. If an older one rotted, we assign a later date. We do not measure reality, we measure survival. There is something poetic in that, something fragile, like trying to remember a dream after waking. Perhaps most of our past is dreamlike, fading as the day grows long, leaving only impressions behind. So we approach history not as truth, but as possibility. As a manuscript with missing pages, worn corners, blank spaces where rain washed ink away. Instead of answers, we inherit suggestions. The mind fills gaps with confidence, and textbooks print the final picture clean, linear, resolved. Yet tonight, beneath this softer light, we see that picture for what it is, an outline drawn over silence. The earth may hold secrets far older than the temples we study. A single buried city could shift the timeline like a tide changing shorelines. Evidence does not rewrite history because it is rare, but history could change completely with one artifact that refuses to be ignored. If only a sliver of the ancient world survived, where does the rest of the story sleep? Perhaps beneath drowned coastlines, beneath deserts, beneath volcanic stone. Perhaps the ocean keeps more memory than land ever could. And if our timeline bends even a little, if one fragment appears where it should not, then the next question becomes inevitable. We must turn toward the anomalies, the objects, the genes, the plants that suggest a world older, wider, more connected than we were taught to believe. The ocean has always appeared to us as a boundary, a blue wall that divides one world from the next. Yet long before history carved borders into maps, long before kingdoms measured power in ships and sails, water may have been the thread that stitched humanity together. In the deep past, when memory was oral and writing had no symbol or alphabet to form itself through, people watched waves not as a limit, but as a path. They stood on shores under skies, without cities or smoke, and the horizon was not fear, it was invitation. Imagine them there, skin warmed by sun, wind tracing salt through hair, gazing at water with the same question that still lingers inside us. What lies beyond? We know that tens of thousands of years ago, humans reached Australia not by accident, but by deliberate movement across open ocean channels. 65,000 years is a number older than agriculture, older than organized religion, older than the first brick laid into the first village. If that crossing happened, then ocean travel is not a recent invention, it is an ancient memory. We picture these early journeys in silence, with reed boats skimming through black water, stars overhead forming maps no one wrote but every navigator could read. The sea was different then. Coastlines stretched farther, islands connected in chains, now broken beneath waves. The world was not smaller, simply more fluid. Land shifted, water rose, highways of island and shore disappeared, but the stories of those who travelled them may still drift like foam across time. A canoe does not survive 60 millennia. Rope becomes dust, wood dissolves into silt, but ideas can glide across oceans as easily as wind. Fishhooks, fire-making, tool-shaping, these could spread not through conquest, but through a single voyage repeated slowly across generations. We do not need fleets to imagine connection. A handful of journeys over the span of thousands of years would change everything. One settlement, one beach landing, one exchange of knowledge or seeds. The ocean becomes not a barrier, but a gentle bridge. We often think early humans lacked sophistication, yet they understood tides in ways we no longer remember. Their maps were constellations, and their compass was instinct. They read the flight of birds, the rhythm of swells, the scent of far-off land. A cloud on the horizon meant island. A shift in wind meant season. Navigation was not invention, it was inheritance. The thought is quiet but vast. Perhaps the first world map was not drawn but sailed. We stand inside that possibility, and feel history loosen. If early humans crossed to Australia, could they also have reached other continents long before writing preserved the moment? A journey toward South America across the Pacific, slow, patient, generations long. A drift westward from Asia toward the Americas. Or from Africa, following warm currents into unknown coasts. Migration was rarely planned as we imagine it. It could have been gradual, like tide moving sand, one grain at a time. A child born at sea would learn waves before words. A tribe moving along coastlines over centuries might reach a land no ancestor remembered leaving. Distance is only vast when measured by modern clocks. Time, stretched over eras, shrinks oceans into corridors. When we follow these imagined vessels into the darkness, we feel a strange calm. Not certainty, but potential. Not myth, but logic. If our species reached one continent early, why should we believe it was the only one? It is easier for a civilization to disappear than to endure. Those who travelled did not write their story in stone. Their legacy could be crops traded before memory knew their origin. A tool found where no culture should have left it. A story about strangers from the sea. A word in a language that resembles another across the world. Evidence need not be monumental to be real. History is full of whispers that could have been shouts before time softened them. Picture ancient sailors watching phosphorescent wake glow beneath oars, as if the ocean itself breathed light. Picture nights where stars guided them south, east, west, into waters no ancestor named. They did not know where they were going, only that something beyond the horizon called to them. We have forgotten how to hear that call, but perhaps they had not. The sea is wide, but human curiosity has always been wider. A single spark of exploration could ignite across generations like slow-burning fire. We are descended from wanderers. Our bones know movement. Our dreams still lean toward open sea. If early humans mapped the world in silence, their roots are gone, erased by tides and centuries. But faint traces remain, scattered like breadcrumbs across continents. Chapter 2 begins with those traces. The objects, the artifacts, the impossible evidence that something crossed the water long before history acknowledged it. The winds carried more than waves. They carried footsteps no shore remembers, and those footsteps left clues waiting to be found. In museum glass, the past stands still, but behind each polished surface lies a silence that trembles if pressed too hard. Some objects do not sit comfortably inside the timeline we have arranged for them. They appear in the wrong places, carry unfamiliar fingerprints, whisper of journeys no history book records. When lifted from the sand, they bring with them a question that has no easy answer. If no ships crossed oceans for thousands of years, how did these things arrive where they should never have been? Consider the pottery fragments found in South America, decorated with patterns disturbingly similar to Old World styles. Spirals, cross-hatched grids, motifs that echo designs thousands of miles across the sea. We call them coincidence, because coincidence asks nothing of us. Yet when the clay is traced and dated, when pigment analysis says it belongs to an age long before recorded contact, the timeline shivers. It is as if a forgotten hand reached across continents, shaping clay with knowledge learned elsewhere. We do not know whose hand it was. We only know it existed. Then there is metallurgy. In regions where no smelting should have developed, metal artifacts appear with alloys too advanced for the civilizations to which they are assigned. Copper fused with tin or arsenic before the cultures credited with such skill had even begun mining. A single dagger can disrupt an entire chronology. A hammered pendant with unexplained technique can make scholars restless. We can dismiss one anomaly. A handful becomes harder. Patterns form like constellations in night sky faint, but aligned too precisely to ignore. Some pieces are older than they should be. Others are too foreign. In one case, a sculpted head found in Central America resembles faces carved in ancient African form, broad-nosed, dignified, stone smoothed by hands that may have travelled farther than we assume. In another, a figurine recovered near the Amazon mirrors those of Indus Valley aesthetic, its proportions wrong for native styles, its presence strange, like a lone traveller lost in the wrong story. But perhaps it is not lost. Perhaps we are. Each artifact is small on its own clay, metal, stone. Yet together they form a whisper of contact. Not trade fleets, not conquest, but a drift of ideas, of objects carried through time like seeds in wind. We do not need a grand narrative. The relics themselves are narrative enough. A shard of pottery does not shout. It murmurs. A bronze tool buried under centuries does not accuse. It waits. The quietness is what makes the mystery compelling. If these items had been loudly foreign, we might have dismissed them as fakes. It is their subtlety that haunts us. Imagine the moment of discovery. A brush lifts dust from a pot unlike any other in the region. A metal blade is found too refined for its supposed era. A researcher stares at something impossible in their palm. There is no triumph, only confusion, then fascination. These finds do not demand belief. They ask for humility. They remind us that the world is older, wider, stranger than our maps suggest. Long before Spain, before Rome, before Babylon, someone could have crossed water where we claim no crossing existed. Not armies, not caravans. Perhaps a single vessel, storm-tossed and wandering. A gift left on a foreign shore. A burial washed into sediment where history could not erase it. It may not matter who brought these objects, or how many voyages occurred. What matters is that they are here, refusing to fit neatly into the narrative. We hold them like puzzles missing half their pieces, yet even the fragments imply a picture. If pottery travelled, if metal knowledge crossed oceans, then the barrier between continents was thinner than we imagine. The artifacts do not prove anything, but they suggest everything, and so the mind begins to wander. If objects could move across the sea, what else could travel with them? Ideas, crops, stories carried in memory like seeds waiting for soil. A plant does not grow in a new land by mistake, and a gene does not shift across continents without movement. If clay and copper crossed water, perhaps sweet potatoes and language once followed the same tides. That question rises now like a tide. If objects travelled, could plants and bloodlines have journeyed too, long before history allowed for such a crossing? There are mysteries that lie quiet inside soil, hidden beneath roots and leaves rather than stone and metal. Unlike pottery, plants cannot be explained away as trade goods or curious coincidence. They are living histories, carrying the memory of where they first grew, where they once fed people who spoke languages now lost to wind. When a crop appears in a place it should not be, that presence becomes a question older than maps. How did it travel if no ships were there to bring it? Sweet potatoes tell one of the most troubling stories. They are native to South America, yet they grow deep in Polynesia, on islands separated by an ocean vast enough to swallow empires. Their genetic lineage matches so closely that the connection cannot be ignored. No known voyage recorded their passage. No chronicler wrote of canoes meeting foreign shore. And yet, the vines are there, their roots splitting island soil. They arrived before European sails ever touched the Pacific. We are left with two possibilities. Either seeds crossed oceans alone, wandering by storm or drift, or someone carried them. One explanation is easier. The other, more unsettling. But plants do not move with intention unless guided by hands. There are other examples, quieter but just as persistent. In Egyptian mummies, traces of nicotine and cocaine appear, substances native to the Americas, plants that should never have touched the Nile before Columbus, before the caravels, before any documented contact. Scholars search for alternative origins. They suggest contamination, trade through unknown intermediaries, accidents of preservation. Yet each explanation feels thin, stretched like cloth trying to cover too wide an absence. It would take only one ancient voyage between continents to seed these substances into burial rituals. Just one crew landing, trading leaves and resin, returning with something exotic and strange. A single moment lost to time could have rewritten both worlds before history knew to watch. Botanical lineage is not opinion. It is ancestry. A vine carries memory the way a family carries resemblance. Genetic markers in crops reveal paths older than written chronology. Corn varieties reflect patterns of movement and hybridization. Cotton strains appear where they should not. Peppers and gourds show up in excavations across oceans apart. We do not need evidence of fleets, only evidence of one exchange repeated through generations. A seed, sprouting in new land, becomes a lineage. Its presence whispers that someone crossed water, intentionally or by accident, carrying a piece of home that later took root on foreign ground. There is something haunting in this kind of proof. Plants do not lie. They do not exaggerate. They simply grow where they are placed, and by doing so they leave behind a clue. Unlike clay, unlike bronze, unlike carvings that might be traded as symbols or gifts, crops require cultivation. They need soil, tending, familiarity. They demand human presence. One does not plant a sweet potato without purpose. One does not harvest nicotine or coca leaves without knowledge of how to use them. And so the question settles softly, like seeds drifting through air. Who carried these plants across the sea? And why do we not remember them? The timeline bends in quiet ways, not through wars or monuments, but through roots binding into unexpected ground. If a single crop can cross an ocean unseen, then humans may have crossed with it. Their story is not carved in stone, it grows in gardens. Their legacy is not told in chronicles, it blooms in leaves. And if plants could travel long before historians admitted such voyages were possible, then perhaps language holds similar marks of forgotten movement. If vines can span worlds, perhaps words did too. Language is the oldest archive we possess, yet it leaves no fossil, no artifact, no trace, except within the mouths of descendants who never knew the origin of their words. We tend to believe speech was born separately in distant corners of the world, evolving like islands that never touched. But sometimes, when we lean close and listen, we hear faint echoes linking languages across oceans, strands like broken bridges still suspended in sound. Words that should be unrelated carry similar roots. Myths that should never have met share the same shape. Symbols carved into stone continents apart show the same curve, the same sun, the same serpent, as if the story began once, in one place, then scattered like embers before the wind. No pottery speaks this way, no metal blade whispers, but language does softly, insistently. Polynesian terms for boat and navigation resemble those found along parts of South American coastlines. African words tied to ritual and kingship appear with uncanny cousins in early American tongues. The rhythm of syllables, the breath that shapes sound, hints at a shared memory. Scholars label it coincidence or diffusion through unknown intermediaries. But coincidence frays when patterns repeat too cleanly, too often. Words do not travel without people. Stories do not replicate across seas unless a voice carried them there. Then there are myths not as evidence, but as inheritance. A great flood, a sky serpent, a goddess of maize or grain, a hero who sails beyond the horizon and returns changed, or never returns at all. These legends appear in Sumer and in the Andes, in Polynesia and in West Africa. They unfold in parallel arcs, familiar as if drawn from the same ancestral dream. Oral tradition travels farther than stone. A single tale told by a tired sailor to a curious child can ripple outward through generations. Those ripples could cross water long before writing knew to capture them. A carved symbol might prove influence. A shared story might prove contact. Imagine language not as invention, but as memory, the residue of voices lost in centuries of migration. A word for star in one place matches a word for guide in another, separated by half the world. A symbol for sun looks like its twin, thousands of miles away. We can ignore one resemblance. 2. Invite curiosity. A dozen begins to feel like someone has erased the connecting pages of a book. When we trace these linguistic threads, we walk through a library with missing shelves, yet enough survives to suggest what once stood there. Even script carries strange parallels. Ogham lines resemble petroglyph marks found in the Americas. Proto-writing symbols in the Pacific echo those in African rock art. We may never know whether they were born from the same root, or whether human creativity simply circles back to itself. But the repetition is undeniable. Two minds on opposite sides of the world carved the same spiral into stone. Two voices, separated by oceans, told the same creation myth. Two languages breathed similar words for ocean, for sky, for God. Coincidence explains some things, but not everything. At some point, the patterns begin to feel like memory preserved through sound rather than text. Language evolves, like vines climbing in new directions, but sometimes it retains a hint of older growth beneath the bark. A shared phoneme, a mirrored myth, a symbol too similar to be ignored. These clues are subtle, but subtle clues endure where monumental proof may have drowned. A megalith can be buried. A story can survive inside a word whispered at a fire centuries after its origin. So we are left with a possibility as gentle as it is profound. Perhaps people crossed oceans before recorded time, not in legions but in handfuls, leaving the faintest imprint. Not cities or armies, but language, the most human trace of all. Their passage remains not in ruins or artifacts, but in words still living on someone's tongue, unaware of how ancient they are. The question now grows sharper, quieter, more insistent. If pottery moved across the sea and crops followed, and if stories and words carry the same shadow of connection, Then one mystery stands before us like a door slightly open. Someone must have carried these seeds, clay, plant, language across the water. The next step is to ask who they were and how they learned to cross a world we assumed too wide to pass. Before the first city wall rose, before grain was sown in neat furrows, before history chose a language to tie itself to, humanity had already learned to follow the sea. Not as conquerors, not as empires, but as wanderers, with eyes turned toward the horizon and hands steady enough to trust the waves. When we speak of origins, we picture hunters in forests, gatherers along riverbanks. Yet there were others people who learned to ride water the way birds ride wind. Their story is older than civilization, older than the invention of roads. These were the first mariners, and they crossed oceans long before history learned to write. The Jomon people of ancient Japan carved boats from cedar more than 10,000 years ago. Their pottery is famous, but their oars may be the more astonishing relic. Imagine them pushing away from shore under constellations brighter than any we know today, guided not by compass, but by stars reflected perfectly upon black water. They fished. They traded obsidian and shell. They moved along coastlines where no kingdom existed. They were seafarers at a time when most of humanity still measured distance in footsteps, not tides. Far across the Pacific, another lineage of sailors, the Lapita, built vessels that could outrun storms and cross distances modern sailors once feared. Their pottery shards mark routes like breadcrumbs, scattered across island chains, from Taiwan to Fiji, from Samoa to Tonga, and perhaps farther still, the Lapita did not stay. They moved. Their migrations formed sweeping arcs across the Pacific, glowing pathways like veins of light through the ocean's dark heart. They carried dogs, chickens, taro, yams, living cargo, proof of intentional travel, proof of planning far older than empire. Picture these early boats cutting through warm equatorial water, sails of woven fiber billowing like lungs breathing sky. Picture a night where the Milky Way becomes a map, every star a compass point. The sea was not empty to them. It was alive, a road of currents, wind corridors, migratory birds that led the way. Their ancestors may have reached islands thousands of kilometers apart without ever needing a chart. Knowledge was memory, passed through generations like lullabies. A child could learn the sea the way another learned harvest cycles. For these cultures, the ocean was not a barrier. It was home. We seldom speak of them when telling the story of humanity. We celebrate farmers, builders, emperors, yet the first explorers had no fields or walls. They carried their world with them in their boats, in their sails, in their skill to read waves like scripture. Their legacy survives not in monuments, but in the distribution of people across the Pacific, scattered like stars. It is a quiet inheritance, one we notice only when we trace lineage back to water instead of land. If such mariners existed, and they did, then it becomes easier to imagine voyages that slipped beyond recorded memory. A storm could have pushed a canoe beyond familiar islands. A curious crew could have sailed toward sunrise or sunset, not knowing what waited beyond the line where sea meets sky. They may have landed on foreign shores, met strangers who shared fire and grain, exchanged tools or stories. Then tides changed, generations passed, and the memory dissolved like footprints in wet sand. Civilization may have been born from boats, not from bricks. Navigation may have preceded agriculture by millennia. Our species may have been oceanic before it was domestic. If humans could cross the Pacific in prehistory, then the world was never as divided as we imagine. The ocean did not separate us, it connected us. And so, the question expands as gently as tide over shore. If these forgotten sailors reached island after island, why not continents? If they mastered wind and water, why assume they stopped where history begins its record? As we continue, the next section turns toward the possibility that these mariners did touch distant shores and left only whispers behind. Imagine a shoreline centuries ago, a beach of pale sand untouched by iron or compass, where the only witness to arrival was the wind. A canoe or a longship could have landed there, its hull sliding quietly into the shallows. Men and women, tired from unending sea, stepped onto new earth. Maybe they lit a fire, dried skins, fixed a broken paddle. Maybe they traded words or seeds with those they found there. Dawn came, smoke faded, waves returned, and carried their memory away. History only remembers what stays, not what vanished. The Polynesians are some of the most remarkable navigators our species ever produced. Their double-hulled voyaging canoes could cross distances greater than the width of nations. Some researchers believe they reached the coast of South America long before Europeans crossed the Atlantic. Sweet potatoes, with DNA pointing back to Andes soil, bloom across Pacific islands like soft evidence. Chickens with Polynesian markers appear in Chilean earth. The idea is not wild, only forgotten. All it would take is one successful landfall, one exchange of seeds or language or story. No empire needed, no conquest, just a meeting that the ocean later erased. Far to the north, the Norse reached America as well, long before Columbus carried Spain's banner westward. Lance or Meadows, on the coast of Newfoundland, shows Viking timber and iron nails a settlement that flickered briefly, then dimmed into legend. The sagas speak of Vinland, wild grapes, and conflict with the inhabitants they met. But even this contact was not permanent. The Norse left. Their structures fell. Grass reclaimed their walls. A century, a generation, and history forgot, until archaeology brushed away the soil. If such encounters can vanish within a millennium, how many others dissolved entirely into wind and tide? And then there are the Indus Valley traders, whose beads and seals appear in Mesopotamia. Their ships traveled the Arabian Sea, hugging coastlines or perhaps daring open waters. They may have reached Africa, the Gulf, and lands beyond record. Their civilization collapsed long before Greek philosophers shaped Western memory. Earthquakes, drought, river shifts, and a culture that once rivaled Egypt became dust. But trade routes leave clues like faint fingerprints, carnelian beads thousands of kilometers from the river where they were carved, tin that crossed oceans without a single document tracing its path. We picture these travelers not as armies, but as clusters of humans moving like tides, sometimes advancing, sometimes retreating, sometimes disappearing forever. A volcanic eruption could erase a port city in a single night. Rising seas could swallow a harbor whole. Generations pass, and stories soften. A child hears that strangers came once, but the child's grandchild hears only myth. A shoreline storm smooths footprints until even memory has no place to stand. Contact may have happened not once, but countless times, brief, quiet, ephemeral. A ship caught in current, a crew pushed too far by wind, an island discovered and then abandoned when supplies ran thin. History favors what endures, not what merely happened. We remember Rome because stone stands. We remember China because dynasties wrote their births and deaths. But who remembers the crew who crossed an ocean, touched a strange shore, and vanished without inscription? In this softer light, the world feels less divided than textbooks suggest. Ocean crossings could have occurred like sparks bright for a moment, then lost to darkness. The Polynesians, the Norse, the merchants of Indus, each left hints but not certainty. What remains are whispers, crops growing where they should not, sagas of lands no map shows, beads and blades far from home. The waves remember more than we do. If people reach shores unrecorded, even briefly, then they shaped history without entering it. And so we turn to what comes next. If these sailors touched other worlds, what marks did they leave behind in stone and earth, waiting beneath silt for us to uncover? There are places where history stands silent, where stone rises from earth like memory made solid. Some ruins lie exposed under open sky. Others sleep beneath water, beneath volcanic rock, beneath continents that forgot them long ago. When we look at these sites, Göbekli, Tepe, Yonaguni, Dwarka, Gunung Padang, the accepted story of civilization begins to tremble. These monuments do not belong to the timeline we were taught. They feel older than agriculture, older than empire, older than everything we assume we understand about humanity's beginnings. Göbekli Tepe stands at the threshold of history, 12,000 years old, older than the first cities, older than farming, older than writing. Carved pillars, crowned with animals, and symbols rise like the ribs of some ancient cathedral. The builders shaped limestone blocks weighing tons, moved them with precision, arranged them in circles like observatories or temples. Yet according to our textbooks, complex society had not yet arrived. People at that time should have been nomads, simple gatherers following herds across plains. And yet here is a sanctuary older than any empire. A monument that should not exist but does. Far to the east, beneath the waves off Japan, lies Yonaguni. Stone terraces, steps, corridors too geometric to be coincidence, yet too ancient to claim with certainty. Some say it is natural formation. Others see walls and plazas where no city should have stood. Sea levels once lay far lower than today. If Yonaguni belonged to an early coastal civilization, then rising oceans swallowed its memory whole. A city lost, not to war, but to time, left to coral and silence. We cannot ask who built it. We can only stand above the water and feel the weight of possibility. Off the western coast of India, another city sleeps underwater Dwarka. Pillars, roads, and artifacts rest beneath layers of silt, hinting at a thriving port that may predate written Vedic history. Legend speaks of it. Myth remembers it. But archaeology, still cautious, admits there is something there, something large, something organized, something older than comfort allows. If mariners built harbors thousands of years before recorded history, how many others drowned unnoticed? A world of coastlines once stretched wider than maps show today. When ice melted, those old edges vanished, and perhaps cities like Dwarka vanished with them, taking their stories deeper than divers can reach. Then there is Gunung Padang, a hill in Indonesia that is not a hill at all but a layered pyramid older than the pyramids of Egypt. Beneath volcanic soil, beneath centuries of growth, ancient terraces rise like steps toward forgotten sky. Carbon dating suggests occupation that stretches far beyond the threshold of accepted civilization. Stone chambers, columns, retaining walls, as if someone built a monument and time itself tried to bury the proof of their existence. If a culture capable of architecture stood here before agriculture spread, then human complexity did not begin when we thought. It began earlier, much earlier. These places are not isolated outliers. They form a constellation, scattered ruins that whisper of a time before history took its first breath. They suggest not one anomaly, but many, not a single miracle, but a world more advanced, more connected, more ambitious than we ever imagined. If they carved stone with precision before writing, before cities, before the wheel, then why do we assume they could not cross oceans? People who move megaliths can move boats. People who align temples with stars can follow stars across water. The sea is no barrier to those who built monuments to the sky. We stand in awe before these ruins, feeling the ground of certainty shift beneath us. They challenge the story we inherited, the neat progression from simple to complex. Perhaps civilization rose more than once. Perhaps maritime cultures flourished and fell, long before recorded kings etched their names into tablets. The silence of these sites is not emptiness. It is waiting. And now, as the dust settles and the waves grow louder in our imagination, we follow the story toward its next horizon. If such builders existed, if they carved their legacy into stone and left it for us to rediscover, then the ocean itself must become the next place we search. In the coming chapter, water is no longer background. It becomes character, witness, and keeper of forgotten worlds. When we look at a map, the ocean appears endless, an expanse too wide, too deep, too hostile to cross. But the sea is not blank. It is patterned. It moves with purpose. Beneath the surface, currents flow like rivers inside a vast body, carving pathways across the blue that have existed longer than memory. To early humans, water may not have been barrier, but invitation. Where we draw borders, nature had already drawn roads. Across the Pacific runs the Kuroshio Current, warm and swift, curling eastward like a pulse. It can carry driftwood, canoes, even entire trees across thousands of kilometers. The Humboldt Current rises cold from Antarctica, sweeping nutrients and life along South America's spine. The equatorial flows run steady as breath, pushing everything in their path toward distant archipelagos. These currents do not ask for sails or engines. They move with or without us. A vessel placed upon them will travel, slow but certain, guided by forces older than civilization. This is not myth, it is oceanic architecture. In modern times, we have seen what the sea can carry. After storms, drift logs from South America wash onto shores of the Pacific Islands. Japanese fishing boats lost in typhoons have reappeared months later in California. Objects abandoned in one ocean arrive in another, like messages written by tide. No human at the helm, no map in a trembling hand, just wind and water shaping destiny. If accidents today can cross half the world, what might have happened 10,000 years ago, when people lived closer to nature, reading waves instead of ignoring them? The Polynesians knew the ocean intimately. They watched birds vanish toward land beyond sight. They knew when swells changed direction, when clouds built over distant islands. They followed whales, followed stars. Their world was not islands separated by water. It was a single ocean shaped by movement. A canoe leaving one shore could, with patience, reach another. Not overnight, not easily, but possibly. And possibility, stretched across centuries, becomes inevitability. One of the clearest demonstrations came much later, the Kon-Tiki expedition. A simple raft, built using ancient-style materials, drifted from Peru to Polynesia in 1947, carried mostly by current and perseverance. No modern navigation, no engines, only wind, water, courage. If a small team in mid-20th century could cross the Pacific on primitive design, then ancient travelers, even by accident, could too. The ocean does not demand mastery, it offers passage. Picture ancient boats resting on calm water, sails breathing wind. The night sky reflects in waves like twin constellations, one above, one below. A shift in breeze, a pull of current, and suddenly the boat is moving farther from home. Not through force, but through surrender. Perhaps early sailors learned that the ocean rewards stillness as much as effort. They may have drifted with storms, surfed currents, followed birds instead of charts. Navigation before history was not precise. It was intimate. A relationship, not calculation. In this light, oceans transform. They are not voids waiting to swallow daring souls. They are silent highways, invisible but dependable. A canoe on the Kuroshio Current could reach the Americas. A raft on the Humboldt could drift toward Polynesia. A single journey, lost to time, might have carried crops, stories, people across water where textbooks claim no passage existed. We do not need fleets to imagine connection. We need only one crossing, one arrival, one shared meal beside a fire, a seed planted in foreign soil, a word spoken that later becomes something more. The ocean could have done the heavy work, moving people like leaves, gently and persistently. Not conquest movement, not empire exploration without intent. As we feel this possibility settle, something shifts. The sea no longer feels like edge of world. It feels like origin of movement itself, a cradle for migration, a memory of humankind untethered from land. And now, with the current beneath us, we drift toward the next question. If the ocean offered pathways, who walked them? Who were the people who let the waves carry them farther than history remembers? The next section turns toward those travelers, toward signs of early arrivals on distant shores, faint footprints washed by tide, but never fully erased. The sea does not always require intention. Sometimes it makes decisions for us. A storm rises, wind turns violent, and suddenly a canoe built for a short journey becomes a passenger of the ocean itself. Modern history has recorded countless small vessels carried far beyond where they were meant to go, across bays, across seas, sometimes across entire oceans. They arrive months later on distant shores, barnacled, weather-worn, but unmistakably human. If this happens now, under satellite skies and steel hulls, then what might have happened when the world was wild and no one kept record of where a voyage began or ended? In the Pacific, fishermen have vanished during typhoons, only for their boats to wash ashore thousands of kilometers away in Hawaii or the Americas. Their paths were not charted, the currents guided them. Winds pulled, tides carried, storms pushed. What was meant to be a small circle of life suddenly became a line drawn across the ocean. Some boats arrived with survivors, sunburned and half-starved. Others arrived empty, the sea having taken its toll. But arrival itself is proof. A vessel can drift across worlds without permission or purpose. No sails, no maps, only water deciding direction. Seeds travel this way too. Coconut palms spread across tropics, not by plan, but by drift. A seed falls, floats, rides tide for weeks or months, then arrives on a new beach and takes root. Volcanic pumice has crossed oceans like this lightweight stone, drifting for years, carrying microorganisms to shores where no human foot had stepped. The ocean is a courier, subtle but relentless. A storm can scatter futures, like pollen. Once, after the eruption of Krakatoa, pumice rafts carried insects and plants across seas, colonizing islands newly formed by fire. If plants and spiders can reach distant continents on waves born of chaos, then humans, who cling to boats with breathing hope, could have done the same. Not every drift voyage would end in survival, but one survivor is enough to plant a crop. One survivor is enough to tell a story. One survivor is enough to shape genetic lineage for generations. Picture a canoe overturned by storm, crew lost, but one person clinging to the hull. Days pass, weeks blur. When the waves finally calm, the boat touches sand on a shore unknown. The survivor, delirious but alive, crawls inland. They find fruit, water, shelter. They stay. If they meet others, language mixes like tides. If they sow seeds brought accidentally in the bottom of the vessel, crops appear that do not belong to the soil. If children are born, genes travel farther than boats ever could. History records none of this. No scribe awaited them. No stone tablet etched the moment. The ocean is generous but never loud. Most landfalls like this would vanish into legend, into myth, into a whispered tale of strangers with foreign eyes. But each one could ripple for centuries, changing what people grew, what they spoke, even who they became. A single drift can alter history, even if history forgets. We imagine exploration as deliberate, heroic, organized, but chance shapes more than we admit. Storms drag boats farther than the bravest captain dares to sail. Waves choose directions no chart shows. Perhaps early contact between continents was not planned, but accidental, an outcome of weather and survival. Those who reached new worlds by force of ocean left no monuments, only descendants, only words, only seeds. The idea is quiet but unsettling. How many unrecorded meetings happened simply because a storm refused to let someone go home? As water moves boats and seeds without effort, so too might it move stories, tales of gods, strangers, and ocean walkers. And with that thought, we flow into the next question, softer yet deeper. If drift and chance once carried people into the unknown, then perhaps memory preserved what history forgot, not in ruins but in myth. When written history fades, stories remain. They drift through generations like leaves on wind, carried from fire circle to fire circle, from elder to child, from memory to voice. In many parts of the world, Polynesia, the Americas, Africa, Southeast Asia, legends whisper of people arriving by sea long before any admiral, conquistador, or explorer etched their name into record. The details vary, like shells scattered along a beach, but the pattern persists. Visitors came from horizons no one had named yet, some with pale skin like dawn, some darker than volcanic rock, some speaking tongues no one recognized. They stayed a while, or they vanished, or they were swallowed by the waves again. But the stories remained. In Polynesia, there are tales of voyagers from beyond the sunrise, strangers who arrived in vessels, unlike local canoes, men with long noses, with skin lighter than coconut milk. They were not conquerors. They traded knowledge, shared tools, then left or died, becoming part of the land's memory. Elsewhere in the Pacific, some legends speak of shipwrecked outsiders who married into island communities, whose descendants carried unusual features, whose words blended into the local language like foreign birdsong woven into native chorus. A single, unexpected syllable in a modern dialect might be the ghost of a long-forgotten conversation on a beach. Along parts of South America, indigenous traditions recall tall visitors who came from the sea, taught agriculture or architecture, and vanished without explanation. Some versions describe bearded men, peaceful but strange, arriving not in fleets but in silence. In Mesoamerican lore, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god, is sometimes remembered as a pale traveler who sailed east, promising to return. Scholars debate interpretation, myth, symbolism. Yet beneath the divine feathers lies a simple shape, a foreign teacher who came by water, then left. Myth and memory blur like tide and sand. In parts of Africa, fishermen tell old stories of boats appearing on the horizon, carrying people with hair the color of sun-bleached rope. In return, some Amazonian tribes speak of ancestors who once greeted visitors with skin dark as riverbank clay. No one wrote this down when it happened. But voices kept it alive, passed through storytellers like genetic material of belief. Myth is a kind of inheritance, fragile, mutable, but persistent enough to survive what stone and wood cannot. Myths rarely speak in dates. They speak in light, shadow, hunger, arrival. They do not name kings or document treaties. They remember a feeling, the shock of seeing strangers emerge from waves, the awe of new language entering the ear, the fear or wonder of first contact. Legends preserve impressions the way fossils preserve bone structure, offering shape but not certainty. A shipwreck becomes a god descending. A foreign crew becomes spirits returning to sea. Over centuries, truth becomes dreamlike, yet not erased. Imagine one voyage lost to storm, A boat shattered against reef. Survivors crawling ashore among people who had never seen such faces. They learn to speak each other's words. They share planting techniques, new symbols, old songs. One dies. One becomes elder. A child is born with a story in their blood. Generations later, the details blur, but the core remains. Strangers came once, from far away. They brought something with them. They left something behind. Myth becomes archive when archaeology is silent. When there is no preserved hull, no carved tablet, no ruin tall enough to defy erosion, stories must carry the weight of history. And when different continents hold similar tales of visitors from east or west, from rising or setting, sun coincidence begins to feel small, inadequate, like a blanket too short for the cold. Perhaps these stories are not inventions, but memories stretched thin over time. What if myth is the oldest evidence we overlook? Not fantasy, but survival of ancient fact. The ocean has carried strangers again and again, long before maps claimed ownership of truth. Now we leave legend behind and step into something more physical, not words or crops or pottery, but the trace left in bodies themselves. If sailors reach distant shores, then their bloodlines may still flow quietly through descendants who do not know why their features carry echoes of a journey forgotten. Blood carries memory deeper than history. Inside every cell lies a story written not in ink, but in sequences of inheritance, small variations, shared markers, fragments of ancestry that travel further than boats and survive longer than monuments. Genetics is a silent witness. It does not argue, it does not exaggerate, it merely persists. And when we trace these microscopic signatures across oceans, we uncover paths that do not align with the map we were given. Polynesian DNA holds something curious, a faint genetic thread linking island populations to South America long before European contact. The connection is subtle, a shared allele here, a mitochondrial pattern there, but the consistency is striking. If these islanders never met South Americans, how did their bloodlines learn the same rhythms? Perhaps it happened only once, a single voyage, a handful of travelers arriving exhausted after months at sea. Or perhaps it happened many times, in generations lost to tide and time. Genetics does not tell us how, only that something passed between these worlds. Then there is the Denisovan inheritance woven through Pacific genomes. Fragments of ancient humans, neither Homo sapiens nor Neanderthal, live on most strongly in Melanesian and Aboriginal populations. These genetic shadows suggest interbreeding far from the African cradle, deep in forgotten landscapes. Their presence means migrations occurred long before textbooks allow. Waves of humanity moved through island chains like wind through trees, leaving traces so faint they survived only as inheritance. We may never find their bones, but their echo lingers in chromosomes. A similar mystery appears in early American remains, where certain lineages seem unexpectedly African, predating the slave trade by thousands of years. This is contested, debated, often dismissed, but dismissal does not erase anomaly. It only postpones its reckoning. Bones degrade, flesh vanishes, but genes endure. One mutation preserved across oceans can whisper of forgotten contact, of meeting beneath palm fronds, of a foreign child raised among strangers who later called him ancestor. The body remembers even when language and story dissolve. Genetics does not offer certainty. It offers suggestion. It reveals fingerprints on glass long after the hand has gone. A shared haplogroup is not proof of a voyage, but it is invitation to wonder. If islands bear the imprint of South American DNA, if Pacific peoples carry Denisovan ghosts, if early Americans show African ties without recorded travel, then perhaps our history is not incomplete, only unread. We stand like archaeologists at the entrance of an unexcavated tomb, tools held tight, breath quiet, knowing something waits beneath dust we have not brushed away. Picture bloodlines like rivers. They branch, they split, they rejoin. A single tributary can carry memory across entire continents before dissolving into sea. If even one canoe reached a distant shore and a single child was born there, that lineage could survive for millennia. The story might be forgotten, but the gene remains, like a lantern glowing beneath skin. We inherit not only appearance, but movement migrations etched into bone marrow, travels stored in the architecture of life itself. So we approach genetics with humility. These patterns do not prove voyages, but they soften the ground beneath our assumptions. They transform the ocean from impassable to traversable, from barrier to bridge. If the body remembers what the mind cannot, then history may be less linear than we imagine. more tidal, more cyclical, more open-ended. We look into blood and find a map that does not match the one drawn by historians. We do not know every journey our ancestors made, but our DNA whispers that there were more than we have recorded. Now we follow this thread deeper, into one of the most controversial connections of all, a link between island navigators and South American shores that challenges everything we thought we understood. There is a thread stretched across the Pacific, faint, almost invisible, yet strong enough to carry the weight of a forgotten meeting between worlds. It lies in the blood of people, in the roots of plants, in the bones of animals, in the structure of ancient boats that rode currents like feathers on wind. When we follow that thread, gently, without force, it leads us to one of the most elegant possibilities in human history. Polynesians may have reached South America long before Europe imagined another ocean beyond the horizon. The evidence glows softly, like embers in a darkened room. Mitochondrial DNA from Polynesian island populations shows markers shared with indigenous groups along the South American coast, not recently, but far earlier than European arrival. The similarities are small, but persistent. They suggest interbreeding across oceans, not myth, not legend biology. A child born of two worlds, whose descendants carried the memory of that union in their cells like a whisper that never faded. Then comes the sweet potato. It is native to the Andes, yet it grows across Polynesia as though it belonged there all along. Its genome reveals the truth. It did not drift by chance. It was carried, cultivated, nurtured across islands far from its homeland. A crop cannot cross oceans alone and thrive. It needs human hands to plant it, human hunger to justify the journey. The sweet potato is not just food, it is evidence. If it reached Polynesia before Europeans knew Pacific winds, someone carried it. Someone crossed that water. Along the coast of Chile, archaeologists uncovered chicken bones that told another story. Chickens did not evolve in South America, they came from elsewhere. When tested, the ancient bones revealed Polynesian genetic signatures, not European ones. These birds lived and died in America before Columbus. Their lineage traced not to Spain, but to the Pacific. A quiet detail, but devastating if we listen closely. Chickens do not swim. They sail. This is not proof of empire or mass migration, but it suggests contact. A voyage, perhaps few, perhaps many. Polynesian double-hulled canoes were masterpieces of navigation, capable of traveling thousands of kilometers with stability, speed, and grace. Their sails drank the wind like lungs. Their captains read stars the way scholars read manuscripts. To them, the ocean was not distance, it was highway. The Americas were not unreachable, only unrecorded. Picture a canoe departing from Rapa Nui or Mangareva, stocked with taro, yam, coconut, water sealed in gourds. The voyagers watch birds as compass, clouds as omen, swell direction as map. Days stretch into weeks. Then, faintly, they see land a new continent, rivers wide as dream, forests dense with fruit, people whose faces and languages carry no familiar melody. There might have been exchange food for stone tools, words traded like shells. There might have been friendship, marriage, children, or conflict, or quiet, drifting apart. We do not know the details, but the sweet potato remembers, the chickens remember, the DNA remembers, even if history forgot. One connection, even once, changes everything. It means oceans were crossed not just in accident, but in mastery. It means two worlds met gently, without empire, without plague, without written proclamation. A small contact could ripple through centuries, shaping what people ate, how they lived, who they became. And yet, because no stone tablet preserved the moment, we treat it as myth. But myths begin somewhere. Evidence, even small, even fragile, lights the path. We do not need fleets to rewrite history, only one successful voyage across the Pacific long before Europe claimed discovery. It could have happened quietly, like a canoe gliding through moonlit waves. And now, we follow this line of inheritance deeper. If Polynesians reached America even once, then perhaps they were not the first. The next section turns to stranger signatures in American DNA, hints of contact even older, more mysterious, less comfortable for history to hold. There are threads in human ancestry that do not weave neatly into the narrative we have accepted. They appear unexpectedly, a misplaced stitch, a color no one recalls, adding hints of people whose stories were never written. but whose blood still moves quietly through descendants, unaware of what they carry. Genetics shows us patterns we cannot always explain. Haplogroups appear where they do not belong. Lineages materialize in places they should not exist. Like a dream half remembered, they speak, but not loudly enough to tell us how. In pre-Columbian America, certain DNA signatures defy classification. Anomalous haplogroups appear in ancient remains without clear origin, like visitors who left only a trace of themselves before fading into the crowd of history. Some skeletal studies have revealed African markers in regions that books claim Africa never touched before the 16th century. Yet there they are, alleles that suggest movement, not myth. Not thousands of Africans, but perhaps only a few. A handful of voyagers, shipwrecked or wandering, merging into new lands. Their bones did not survive, but their DNA did, sheltered within children who grew without knowing why their blood remembered another shore. Even more haunting is evidence of gene flow predating Vikings or Europeans, by centuries in some cases, millennia. This is not narrative of conquest, but of quiet contact. Two peoples meeting at the edge of ocean, exchanging more than trade goods. A mixed child is living proof, without inscription. Their line continues, generation by generation, until only markers remain small variations in a genome. Like a secret whispered so softly it becomes part of the background hum of ancestry. The Olmecs, among the most enigmatic American civilizations, leave genetic traces that some researchers have linked to Old World sources. The sculpted heads they left behind resemble no nearby population, perfectly broad faces, heavy lids, expressions of power carved in basalt. Whether this is coincidence or memory reflected in stone, we cannot say. But when DNA analysis finds signals not entirely local, the mind begins to wonder. Perhaps an outsider once stood among them, a sailor carried by current or storm. Perhaps someone from far across the Atlantic or Pacific taught or learned, or simply lived long enough to leave a child behind. No empire records such a meeting. No scribe etched the moment. But bodies remember. There is sorrow in these questions, not because they disrupt history, but because they hint at lives forgotten. Imagine a lone sailor washed ashore, taken in by people who had never seen his like. He learns their language, he marries, he dies. His children grow into the rhythm of a culture not entirely their own. No one records his arrival, but his DNA travels on like a lantern flickering through blood, a memory without story, a secret only chromosomes can speak. This is not evidence of sweeping migrations. It is evidence of possibility, of contact subtle enough to be erased by time. A world where humans crossed seas more often than we imagine, but not often enough to carve empire into stone. The ocean could carry one crew, one child, one lineage, and that alone may change the future of a region, without leaving monuments or artifacts behind. History often seeks clarity, but ancestry rarely offers it. Bloodlines twist, like braided cord strands from north, from west, from across water. Some threads shine brightly in data, others fade almost to invisibility. Genetics does not answer how or why. It only shows that something happened, somewhere, between people who were not supposed to meet. So we stand at this quiet crossroads, where blood speaks softly and history has no reply. If genes travelled across seas long before Columbus or Vikings or recorded empire, then someone carried them. A boat, a storm, a drift, a deliberate journey we do not know, but the inheritance remains. Like a family secret no one explains, it waits for us to listen. Now that ancestry reveals cracks in the timeline, the next question expands beneath us like rising tide. If such contact occurred, then what world existed before history began to write what civilization, what culture, what ocean-born memory lies beyond reach of record, waiting beneath waves and stone? The ocean keeps secrets the way stone keeps form, slowly, quietly, without need for witness. When we descend beneath the surface, history no longer feels like a straight line. It moves in rhythms, erasures, forgotten chapters hidden under salt and time. Sea levels today are not what they once were. At the end of the last ice age, waters rose more than 100 meters, swallowing coastlines where humans may have lived, traded, built. If the first mariners created settlements, they did so along shores now lost beneath miles of blue. We search for origins on land, but perhaps the oldest cities lie beneath waves. Dwarka, off the coast of India, rests like a dream 6 to 8 meters underwater. Divers find walls, streets, Pillars, a submerged metropolis mentioned in myth long before it was discovered. Whether it is the legendary city of Krishna or a different settlement entirely, something once stood where now only fish and barnacled stone remain. Silt fills doorways. Coral grows like ivy across broken thresholds. We are left to wonder how many stories dissolved when the sea returned to claim what land once borrowed. Yonaguni is stranger still. Off southwestern Japan, terraces and geometric shapes lie beneath turbulent tides, steps, platforms, angles too precise for mere accident. Some scholars argue it is natural formation. Others see plazas, roads, ruins of a lost world. The debate itself reveals how fragile certainty becomes when confronted with stone shaped by both nature and hands. If Yonaguni was once a city, it is older than nearly every known civilization. It sleeps beneath water like a memory submerged too deep to rise. Across the ocean, near the Bahamas, Bimini Road stretches like building blocks placed by giants' long rectangular stones aligned with eerie precision. Some claim it is geological fracture, others ancient pier or seawall. Whether natural or crafted, it invites imagination, a causeway to a world erased. Perhaps a harbour where ships once tied rope to wooden posts now eaten by time. Bimini Road may be doorway or illusion, but even illusions suggest story. Atlit Yam, off Israel's coast, leaves no room for ambiguity. It is a Neolithic village preserved beneath Mediterranean waves, houses, wells, human remains, all frozen in place beneath the sea. A mother and child lie embraced as they did 8,000 years ago, the ocean closing their graves like a final breath. Here, we see proof of life drowned, of history erased, not by war, but by rising water. If this one village survived enough to be found, how many dozens, hundreds, thousands did not? The deeper we descend into these submerged worlds, the more the ocean feels not like boundary but graveyard. Coral drapes columns like moss on forgotten tombs. Fish weave through windows where humans once breathed. Seagrass ripples through ancient streets like ghosts of trade routes. We do not know who built these places or what language echoed through their stone halls. We only know something existed and vanished. Loss becomes evidence, ruin becomes reminder. A civilization erased by tide leaves behind only what the sea allows. Wood rots, cloth dissolves, words evaporate. But stone remains, heavy enough to anchor memory to seabed. If early maritime cultures built coastal cities, nearly all their grandest works may now lie where light dims into blue haze. No archaeologist could have found them centuries ago. No historian could write what had already been swallowed. We stand before this possibility and feel the weight of everything we have not recovered. The ocean is not empty, it is archive. And archives can drown. If the oldest civilizations are underwater, then our timeline is young, incomplete, shaped only by what stayed dry. Beneath waves lie the missing chapters flood myths given form, legends given bone. And yet, the ocean is not the only keeper of forgotten worlds. For some, ruins sleep beneath the earth itself, buried not by water, but by time, waiting for us to uncover them layer by patient layer. From here, we move to those who hide under soil instead of sea. Not every forgotten world lies beneath waves. Some vanish under earth, as if the ground itself pulled them into its memory and refused to let go. Among the most unsettling examples stands Gunung Padang, a hill in Indonesia that is not a hill at all, but a massive, layered structure of stone. Terraces rise beneath volcanic soil, like vertebrae of a giant creature sleeping beneath the jungle. Carbon dating suggests construction older than the pyramids, older than agriculture in many regions, older even than the idea of civilization itself. If this is true, then someone built monuments before writing, before cities, before history agreed to begin. Gunung Padang does not appear ruined, it appears concealed. Stones stacked with intent, buried under ash and time. It feels too deliberate, like a secret sealed rather than a monument forgotten. One cannot help but wonder, was something being hidden? Was the site entombed to protect it, or to silence it? Knowledge can be buried, but not erased. Even beneath meters of soil, the architecture speaks in weight and geometry. Then we return to Göbekli Tepe, the temple of pillars in Turkey, older than any book can comfortably hold. Its carvings of animals and abstract forms stand in circles like prayer frozen in stone. But what unnerves more than age is the fact that it was intentionally buried, not destroyed, not abandoned, covered carefully, respectfully, almost ritualistically. Who buries a temple? Who decides that a monument so immense must disappear beneath dirt? Was it fear of catastrophe? Was it tradition? Was it an ending? Or the beginning of something else? No inscription answers. No inscription has ever answered. We are left with questions heavy as the stones themselves. Civilization did not merely rise, sometimes it hid. These buried megaliths feel less like ruins and more like memories someone tried to protect. We imagine hands carrying soil, piling it against sacred walls, covering altars with earth as if tucking them into bed. It suggests awareness, intention, and above all, secrecy. Perhaps knowledge was cyclical, discovered, used, then buried when its time ended. Perhaps a people foresaw a tragedy, a flood, a war, a shift, and sealed their wisdom to preserve it for a future that never arrived. There is calm in the silence of these places, but also discomfort. They force us to confront the idea that history may not be linear. A society advanced enough to build temples could also choose to hide them. Our assumption that progress always moves upward falters. Maybe humanity rose and fell more than once. Maybe what we call the beginning was someone else's aftermath. Walking among these buried stones, we feel like intruders in a library with missing pages. Every dig site offers fragments, a staircase to nowhere, a chamber without explanation, tools shaped from knowledge we cannot trace. If these ancient architects existed before agriculture, then everything we think we know about human development shifts like sand. Gunung Padang whispers of forgotten builders. Göbekli Tepe whispers of intentional silence. When ruins are hidden instead of lost, we are left to fill the space with possibility. Curiosity grows where certainty decays. Who buries a civilization and why? The question echoes through soil, unanswered, inviting us deeper into the chamber of the unknown. If such people existed, if they carved stone before history and then concealed it, their story must survive somewhere, if not in writing, then perhaps in myth or blood, or artifacts waiting beyond the next excavation. And so we continue, moving from earth to the builders themselves, searching not for stone or silt, but for the ones who shaped monuments and sailed oceans, whose memory lingers without name. We stand before buried temples and drowned cities, stone aligned with stars, symbols scattered across continents like seeds of a forgotten garden, and one question rises like dawn. Who were the people who built these worlds? Their names are lost, their language is gone, but their architecture remains like bone beneath earth and ocean. We cannot speak to them, yet their hands speak for them still. Across continents, far apart cultures echo each other with uncanny familiarity. Pyramids rise in Egypt and in Mesoamerica, each shaped like mountains, humans brought down to earth. Megalithic stones align with solstice light in Britain, in Peru, in Cambodia. How did civilizations separated by oceans draw the same shapes in stone? Why does serpent iconography curl through temples in India, through Olmec carvings, through Aboriginal rock art? Sun worship blooms like a wild flower across the globe. Ra in Kemet, Inti in the Andes, Amaterasu in Japan. Even flood myths repeat like a memory. The world could not forget the deluge of Noah, of Utnapishtim, of Manu, of Viracocha. Different storytellers, different shores, yet the same story of water wiping away what came before. Did each culture invent the same myth independently? Perhaps. But independent invention does not explain the alignment of architecture, with astronomy structures calibrated with precision to solstice, sunrise, or the path of Orion. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe's pillars mirror the sky, as it once appeared 12,000 years ago. In Peru, Machu Picchu's windows catch morning sun exactly on solstice day. The pyramids of Giza stack with Orion's belt. The Angkor complex reflects Draco's curve. Even if separated by oceans, these builders knew the sky like a shared manuscript. Knowledge could have travelled, not through conquest, but through mariners carrying starless maps, oral, celestial, migratory. If someone carried this knowledge, they would leave artifacts, plants, genes, shadows of themselves mixed into other worlds. We have seen those shadows. Sweet potatoes crossing oceans, Polynesian chickens in Chile, haplogroups with no homeland in the land where they reside. These are not full truths, but fingerprints, the kind left when someone touches a place briefly, then disappears again. Imagine a maritime culture so ancient it predates agriculture, people who lived with the ocean as kin. Their villages cling to shorelines now swallowed by water. Their temples mark constellations now faded. Their religion worships sun and serpent, two forces universal enough to bind cultures separated by centuries. The serpent winds like a river. The sun rises like certainty. These are symbols that could cross seas as easily as canoes. Were they traders, explorers, refugees of cataclysm? A network of coasts connected like beads on a string, each bead a settlement, each settlement a library of sky and stone. When the Ice Age ended, sea levels rose, and the string sank beneath water. Inland cultures remained to build new monuments, new myths, but traces of the old world lingered. We find their memory not in writing but in architecture, in alignment, in repeating symbols like a chorus sung across hemispheres. Perhaps the builders were many cultures, not one a web of people moving along currents like migrating birds. Perhaps knowledge moved more than blood. Or perhaps there was a single cradle of civilization long before Sumer or Egypt. A maritime civilization forgotten, when coastlines drowned and only mountains kept their temples dry. That world could have been the first, and we are merely the second telling of it. We cannot know their language, but we recognize their work. We see their mind in geometry, their vision in stone, their fear and wonder in flood myths that span worlds without touching. It feels less like coincidence, more like memory, a collective inheritance of something older than written time. How can cultures share symbols an ocean apart unless someone carried them? We stand suspended in possibility, neither proving nor denying, simply acknowledging that the pattern is too large to ignore. And, as this realization settles like dust in ancient light, we approach the point where threads begin to weave into something whole. The next chapter is convergence, where evidence, theory, and wonder begin to form a picture none of us were taught to see. Imagine the earliest humans, not as settlers, but as wanderers of water. People whose world was shaped more by tide than by soil. While textbooks place humanity's first great steps on land, perhaps our oldest migrations were marked by waves. Before ploughs, before grain, before stone cities took form, there may have been a culture that moved like the ocean itself. Fluid, seasonal, transient, leaving footprints only where the shore allowed, and erasing them with each returning tide. This hypothetical world would not resemble the civilizations we celebrate, no monuments rising inland, no pyramids on dry plateaus. Instead, temporary villages built along beaches and river mouths, homes made of reed, fiber, driftwood, structures meant to last a season, not a century. These people would travel with storms and currents, following birds across blue corridors of migration. Children would learn to read sky instead of scrolls, to judge wind by smell, to measure direction by instinct, inherited like heartbeat. Their knowledge would live in memory, not in stone, in experience, not in archive. Such a culture would leave almost nothing behind for archaeologists to find. Wood decays, rope dissolves, shell tools fracture into grain. Whatever they created that could survive thousands of years would likely lie underwater now, where coastlines once stretched farther. As ice melted and seas rose, early camps would drown. The only trace of a maritime world would be scattered hints, shared crops, stray DNA, stories of strangers from the sea. A whisper, not a monument. Picture them moving along continental edges like tides returning home. A fleet of canoes sailing at dawn, sails breathing wind like lungs. They stop only briefly to trade, to fish, to rest, to share fire, then push onward. No government, no empire, no walls. Civilization without permanence. A network of coasts rather than a kingdom of land. At night, stars reflect on water, like twin maps. They gaze upward, guided by constellations no scroll remembers. Their routes trace patterns older than calendars, older than writing. Navigation is not invention, it is inheritance passed hand to hand like flame. If this was the first global culture, history would not remember it. It did not write itself into stone, it did not conquer, it flowed. The world records those who build, not those who pass through. We believe farming came first because agriculture leaves traces, earth turned by hands, seeds domesticated into permanence. But a maritime culture leaves only possibility. Their legacy would be found only where oceans preserved it by accident in rare bones, in genetic threads, in sweet potatoes far from their homeland, in chicken bones beneath Chilean soil. Perhaps this seafaring civilization existed not as empire, but as tradition, a way of life lasting thousands of years before fading like tide. When seas rose, when storms came, When hunger turned explorers into settlers, the ocean wanderers may have anchored themselves inland. Their children might have forgotten how to navigate by stars, trading sails for plows, coasts for river valleys. Only fragments survived in myth, symbol, ruins, misaligned with accepted timeline. We see pieces, never the whole. What if the first residents of Earth were never in one place long enough to leave history behind? It is a gentle thought, not dramatic, not violent, merely vast. A civilization that moved like current, leaving behind no cities except those that drowned, no script except what blood preserved, no monuments except stories that echo across ocean cultures without knowing why. If such people existed, their proof would be delicate and rare, almost invisible, which brings us to the next inevitable question. If a maritime world once lived and vanished, where is the final thread that could bind theory into memory? Next, we search for the remnant that would confirm the unimaginable. History often remembers the loud armies, empires, battles, collapse. But what if some of the most important encounters in human story were quiet? What if early contact between distant peoples was not war or conquest, but curiosity, a conversation at the edge of the sea? Imagine a canoe gliding into unfamiliar surf at dawn, its hull shaped like a shadow against pale sky. The people already living there watch from the tree line, wary, yet fascinated. No flags, no weapons raised, just humans meeting humans for the first time. This is the heart of the contact hypothesis, that early transoceanic meetings were subtle, rare, and gentle enough to leave almost no trace. A handful of explorers land on a foreign coast. They bring crops, sweet potatoes, breadfruit, yam, and trade them for something local. They show how to lash planks or weave sails. They learn a new word. They share a song. Maybe they stay a season. Maybe they leave. Maybe a storm arrives and erases their footprints before morning. A single child born of such a union could carry two worlds in their blood. They might speak a language woven from two coasts like rope. They grow into adulthood, passing knowledge through generations, the way to read clouds, to store water in gourds, to treat wounds with salt and ash. Their descendants never know where that wisdom began. Memory softens into tradition. Tradition becomes ordinary, and the original meeting dissolves into silence. This is why evidence is faint. We expect empires, fleets of ships, trade networks carved into stone, records scratched onto tablets. But what if contact happened like a breeze, present and then gone? Two canoes cross a horizon no migrating animal warned them to follow. They meet strangers who share food under palm shade. No one writes it down because no one sees history happening. They simply live. When they part, only stories remain soft-edged, blurred, surviving as myth. Consider how little is needed to change a world. A single sweet potato plant, carried across the Pacific and replanted, becomes enough. A single chicken breeding with local flocks leaves genetic fingerprints for centuries. A word traded in friendship can echo through time as shared root across languages. These small exchanges may be all that ever happened, and they are enough to rewrite everything we thought we knew. Picture a Polynesian navigator teaching star routes to someone on the coast of South America. Picture a South American showing how to cultivate tubers in island soil. Picture two cultures touching, then drifting apart again like boats parting in current. No conquest, no slavery, no plague, just quiet human encounter. This type of contact would leave almost nothing. Archaeologists could measure, no empire, no battle site, but it would reshape cuisine, ancestry, vocabulary, symbol. This is not revision to glorify forgotten heroes or fabricate lost kingdoms. It is possibility drawn from what remains, crops where geography forbids them, bones with lineage unaccounted for, myths singing names no history remembers. If such meetings happened even once every few centuries, the impact would ripple outward like rings in water, subtle but enduring. We create our story of the past from what we can find, but the past itself may have unfolded in ways too soft for excavation. Quiet contact leaves no ruins. Gentle exchange leaves no war. History remembers the violent because violence scars. It forgets peace because peace leaves little behind. What if ancient contact was not conquest, but just a conversation? We stand inside that question like twilight between tides. Behind us, possibility. Ahead, the unanswered. If early mariners once touched distant shores in silence, then we must ask why that world ended. Why did these networks of wind and water dissolve, leaving only faint evidence behind? The next section turns to that disappearance the moment tides may have turned, and an oceanic world slipped beneath memory. There comes a moment in every long story where silence enters not as pause, but as ending. For a seafaring world that may once have circled the globe, that ending might not have been war, collapse, or conquest. It may have been something quieter, something indifferent, something inevitable, the changing of climate. When ice sheets melted and the seas rose, shorelines were swallowed whole. Villages disappeared beneath waves. The maps in the minds of sailors ceased to exist. No empire was needed to erase them. Tide alone was capable of undoing their world. Imagine a coastline stretching hundreds of miles farther than it does today, dotted with fishing camps, temporary shelters, boatyards, shrines aligned to moon and tide. People there lived in rhythm, with ocean launching at dawn, returning at dusk, building their world from reed, rope, driftwood. They travelled seasonally, following migration routes of tuna and whale, trusting winds like companions. Their children learned to balance on deck before walking confidently on land. The sea was home, not territory, but bloodstream. Then the climate shifted. The world warmed. Glaciers retreated like ghosts fading into horizon. Rivers swelled. Rainfall patterns changed. Slowly, so slowly, no storyteller could mark a single year. Waves crept inland. Beaches narrowed. Harbours transformed into bays. Bays transformed into sea. A generation might notice shoreline lost by only a few steps. Their grandchildren would see forests consumed. A century later, entire villages where ancestors once sang under starlight would lie 10 meters underwater. No scribe recorded this drowning. No one carved warnings into stone because the future was unimaginable. All they knew was that storms came more often, waves broke harder, and fish moved to waters farther than canoes could safely follow. Perhaps they tried to adapt building farther inland, anchoring boats in new coves, but their world had been coast, and coast was dying. A culture built on salt and tide could disappear not with a cry, but with a long, patient submersion. Picture their final days, canoes pulled high on shrinking beaches, nets drying in wind that smells of change, elders watching horizon with eyes heavy as history. Maybe a storm came that no navigation skills could predict, a surge that erased entire generations. Or maybe extinction was slow, a fading, a dispersal, families leaving one by one, seeking steadier land. When the sea claims your history, you do not bury your dead. They sink into memory. Their temples become reefs. Their harbours become silence. This is where grief enters soft, tidal. These people could have crossed oceans long before others dared. They may have traded seeds, told stories to strangers on distant shores, carried language like lantern flame into new worlds. They may have been the thread that stitched continents into one early tapestry. But because their architecture was wood, not granite, because their culture was tide, not mountain, history retained no monument to hold their place. They vanished not through failure, but through the disappearance of the very stage they stood on. We searched the ocean floor for them, glimpses only. A paved road beneath turquoise water, a staircase used by fish, a stone circle smothered in coral like bones dressed in seaweed. We find nothing entire, only fragments the echo of what sank. But absence itself becomes evidence. If the oldest civilizations were coastal, rising sea levels would have swept them away, leaving only migrant whispers inland. The first world may lie drowned, just beyond reach of our tools, seen only in sonar shadows and mythic memory. What if history forgot a civilization not because it failed, but because the ocean rose? It is a quiet tragedy, not dramatic, not violent. A civilization peeled from the earth like paint, its memory diluted in salt water. But in that grief lies understanding. Gaps in timeline are not mistakes, they may be scars. Discontinuities in culture are not errors, they are submersion. What we know of humanity may be only what survived inland, uphill, away from tide. The maritime world, if it existed, may be the missing route beneath all later growth. And so the story narrows toward its unanswered ending. If such a people lived and vanished, drowned not by war but by water, then somewhere, scattered like driftwood on shores of time, must remain one final thread, a piece of evidence that refuses to erode. The next chapter turns toward those unresolved remnants, the last questions that insist someone was there. History is built on what remains, not on what once was. We forget that absence speaks as loudly as stone. We inherit only the scraps that time allowed to survive. A handful of bones, a shard of pottery, a rusted blade cradled in soil. Entire worlds may have existed just beyond that thin threshold of preservation, washed away or rotted into nothing. A maritime civilization, if it lived early and died quietly, would leave behind almost no trace at all. Wood dissolves, cloth frays, boats become silt, stories soften into wind. What survives is not certainty, only suggestion. Most of what ancient people created, tools, shelters, boats, language, music, was never meant to last thousands of years. Organic materials fade like breath on cold air. A wooden ship is magnificent in life, but ephemeral in death. A canoe abandoned on a beach becomes driftwood within a generation. A fishing village of reed and fibre leaves less evidence than a single stone hammer. If the ocean wanderers built their world from what the sea offered, timber, rope, palm fibre, then the tide had no difficulty erasing them. Then comes the coast. The first cities of humans likely rose not inland, but at the edge of water where fish ran, where currents met, where trade flowed like veins. But coastlines from 12,000 years ago do not exist now. They lie beneath 100 meters of sea. The homes, docks, shrines, workshops of a maritime people would rest today beneath layers of sediment, beyond the reach of simple excavation. Sunken cities do not leave scrolls. Coral covers corridors like ivy covering ruin. Underwater worlds decay without witness. Myths, too, decay slower than wood, faster than stone. A story told across 5 generations remains vibrant. Across 50, it becomes legend. Across 500, it becomes metaphor. A stranger arriving by boat becomes a god. A flood becomes a punishment from sky. A sailor's lost daughter becomes a mermaid. In this way, truth survives inside imagination like a seed in deep soil, alive, but unrecognizable. We study myth and forget it once described a memory. Bones are fragile things. Water dissolves them. Soil swallows them. Heat burns them to powder. A single grave at Atlit Yam survived only because sea encased it in silence. How many others washed away? How many ancestors were returned to ocean that carried them, leaving no skeleton for archaeologists to measure millennia later? A civilization that honored the sea might have returned its dead to water. A burial the ocean does not preserve. A legacy without skeletal archive. So proof is scarce, not because the story is false, but because proof itself requires conditions history rarely grants. The maritime world, if it existed, would be the easiest to erase and the hardest to confirm. Every missing canoe could have been a voyage. Every vanished seed could have been cargo. Every unrecorded word could have been shared across continents no document remembers. We do not lack evidence, we lack survival. This realization does not frustrate, it illuminates. The gaps themselves form shape. Like stars in night sky, distance between points reveals a constellation. We see what is gone only by the shadows left behind. Absence becomes presence, not void. A broken record implies a song once played. A missing page implies a book once whole. What if the greatest discovery in human history has already decayed into sand? It is a humbling thought that knowledge may have come and gone like tide before any chronicler knew to catch it. Yet wonder lives here, not defeat. To search for something nearly erased is to acknowledge it mattered. Every submerged ruin is a promise. Every genetic outlier is a thread. Every shared myth is a doorway into memory we have not yet entered. The missing pieces do not end the story, they widen it. They remind us that what we know is only the land above water, while deep below, untouched, may rest the truth of who first crossed the sea. And now we travel toward the places where answers may still be waiting, preserved not in relic or ruin, but in the unexamined edges of the world. For every site we have uncovered, there are 1,000 more still hidden not on mountains or deserts, but beneath the quiet surface of the sea. When ice sheets melted at the end of the last glacial era, coastlines retreated like memories slipping away. Villages, harbours, fire pits, temples all sank into silence. Today, those ancient shorelines lie under the shallow continental shelves that ring every continent like drowned history. We have barely begun to explore them. Picture an underwater landscape where cities once stood exposed to moonlight. Caves carved by river mouths now filled with blue-green light. Beaches where children once chased crabs now smothered in centuries of silt. Divers reach only where water remains forgiving, shallow bays, clear lagoons, sunlit ruins. Yet most coastal sites from 10,000 years ago lie deeper, under pressure and darkness. If a maritime civilization existed, it sleeps there. There are underwater caves in the Yucatan that hold human remains older than pyramids, bones preserved where never touched by air. If such caves exist along continental shelves in Indonesia, India, or South America, they may contain paintings, carvings, relics untouched by time. Imagine art preserved in sealed chambers, pigment still bright, a handprint across stone like a voice long muffled but not lost. We have explored only a fraction of these submerged passages. Beyond the tropics lie trenches, deep scars in Earth's skin where shipwrecks may rest older than writing. Archaeologists search where history is comfortable to reach, on land, in daylight. But the Pacific holds secrets no shovel can touch. Sediments in seafloor cores contain ancient DNA genes, shed by organisms that lived near vanished shores. As technology develops, we may read those traces like pages torn from a book once thought burned. Paleogenomics may reveal human presence far offshore, long before official history begins. Submersibles glide deeper each year, like lanterns descending into forgotten rooms. Autonomous drones map seabeds with sonar that sees through sand. Magnometers detect stone beneath layers of mud. What we call empty ocean floor may simply be architecture asleep beneath sediment. One discovery, a harbour wall, a carved anchor stone, an intact canoe sealed in anaerobic depths would change everything. The mystery feels close now, like something just beyond torchlight. Future explorers may follow continental shelves like treasure maps. They may find homes buried under coral, obsidian blades inside silt, engravings on cave walls where no diver has yet crawled. Beneath Indonesia's Sunda Shelf, thousands of square kilometers were once dry crossroads of migration. Beneath the Persian Gulf lies a drowned valley that may have sheltered early settlements. Off the Caribbean shelf, volcanic stone steps disappear into blue shadow, begging for light. What if the truth sleeps beneath 100 meters of water, waiting for us to breathe it awake? The greatest archaeological discoveries of the next century may not be pyramids or palaces, but drowned coastlines, landscapes, where humanity first lived as ocean people. If we look where light does not reach, we may find the missing chapters of our story. Not in textbooks, but in sediments and sonar signatures. Curiosity is a compass, and we are only now learning to follow it beneath the waves. With every dive, every scan, every quiet hum of submersible engines, we approach the edge of revelation. History has always shone brightest on land, but the sea holds its mirror image in shadow. To understand who we were, we must go where no spade can dig. And so we rise from the deep, carrying this possibility upward into the final synthesis, where all threads converge and meaning emerges like land through mist. History does not always shift gradually. Sometimes it moves in a single breath, one brushstroke of revelation, one moment when the ground beneath certainty loosens, and the world must learn itself again. Imagine it. The day a diver descends along a continental shelf, and their flashlight lands not on featureless stone, but on something carved. Not a rumour, not a fragment, but an intact harbour wall, mooring stones worn by rope, steps descending into silt, pottery still resting where hands once placed it. A city not imagined, not debated, but seen. Picture a wooden vessel buried in anaerobic mud, preserved almost impossibly intact. Its ribs still hold shape, its planks still bear tool marks from an age unnamed, rope hardened into memory. A mast collapsed but not erased. Inside artifacts no tide has scattered. Fishing hooks of unfamiliar alloy, woven fibre that no known culture produced, and beside them something stranger, still a script, two languages side by side, one written in symbols we recognize, the other unlike any in the catalogue of human history. A bilingual inscription is a bridge. Suddenly everything argued becomes readable. Origin gains a voice. In that single moment, the fog we have wandered through becomes form. Theories become context. Myths become reference. A harbour like that would mean connection, deliberate contact across oceans long before recorded time. A boat that survived would speak not just of travel, but of technology. A script would show identity. These are the missing pieces we dream of, material enough to hold, undeniable enough that history could no longer look away. It would not be loud, it would not be triumphant. It would feel like dawn, soft, inevitable, illuminating what was always there. Now imagine how the world would respond. Scholars would gather around the first sonar maps, voices hushed like pilgrims entering a shrine. Newspapers would declare a rewrite of early chronology. Children would open textbooks with chapters newly added: the first sailors, the drowned world, the cross-ocean traders before time. Museum halls would shift like tectonic plates. Exhibits would expand to include migration routes no one had taught before. Not as speculation, as fact. But revision does not erase wonder, it deepens it. For in proving the existence of a forgotten maritime civilization, we widen every horizon. If humans crossed oceans long before cities rose, then the story of us is not linear, it is tidal. Cultures rise not once, but many times. Knowledge is not a staircase, it is a wave returning eternally to shore, wearing new shape each time. That realization does not shrink history. It expands it like sky after storm. Think of standing before that sunken harbour, knowing you are the first in thousands of years to see what human eyes once knew. Silt drifts like slow snowfall. Fish pass through openings where merchants once shouted prices in lost tongue. Your heartbeat echoes against stone. You do not feel triumph. You feel humility, that everything we thought was beginning is only chapter 2. That the true first chapter lies here beneath pressure and dark, preserved not because history remembered, but because the ocean forgot to let go. What if civilization is far older and far wider than we ever believed? The mind slows in awe. We begin to see the old timeline not as false, but incomplete. A map missing coastlines, a story missing its prologue. A single discovery could make missing pieces visible, like a lantern revealing the shape of furniture in a darkened room. We would not need to rewrite what we know. We would extend it. One harbour, one inscription, one preserved boat. That is all it would take for the world to step from speculation into remembrance. And if one such discovery exists, there may be hundreds entire ports still asleep in blue quiet, waiting for technology brave enough to reach them. And so the story turns inward now, toward us. Not what happened, but what it means. If humans once wandered oceans before history began, then modern humanity is not first only latest. We are children of tide, descended from navigators who vanished beneath rising water, leaving only hints for us to rediscover. If the story we have followed is true, or even partly true, then humanity is different from how we imagine it. Not born from isolated valleys or fenced-in kingdoms, but from horizon lines, from tide, from journeys taken not because survival demanded it, but because curiosity called like distant thunder. We see ourselves as children of continents, but perhaps we are children of oceans, instead shaped by waves, not by walls. Imagine a world where the first people were not settlers, but navigators, where ancestors did not stand still, but drifted like migratory birds from island to island, continent to continent, following winds as though they were stories written across the sky. If this is true, then movement is not exception, but inheritance. Wanderlust is not modern impulse, it is memory in bone. Even now, when a person feels drawn to the sea or to far countries they cannot name, maybe they answer a call older than language. We often divide humanity by geography, east or west, old world or new, desert or forest or mountain. But an oceanic ancestry dissolves those borders. If early peoples crossed oceans long before empire, then humanity was never separate. It only drifted apart and forgot it once knew how to return. We are not strangers divided by distance. We are relatives separated by tide. And suddenly, the forgotten sailors become familiar. Not myth, not ghost, but kin. Picture them setting out across black water under unfamiliar stars, afraid, hopeful, alive. Their courage looks like our courage. Their hunger for knowledge feels like ours. They built no empire, no calendar, no senate. They built movement. They built contact. They built possibility, the oldest monument of all. There is quiet pride in this idea. Not nationalism, not conquest, but belonging. If humans once circled the world before history began, then we share ancestry with voyagers who trusted nothing but wind and instinct. They were not primitive. They were not lost. They were explorers not of land, but of everything beyond it. If we come from them, then curiosity is not weakness, it is legacy. The need to know what lies over the horizon is not flaw, it is lineage glowing beneath skin. What if we inherit a world shaped by people we no longer remember? The thought is tender, like finding a photograph of great-grandparents unnamed. We do not know their names, but their faces live in ours. If seafaring civilizations existed and vanished beneath tides, we are still their continuation. We use satellites to map oceans they once crossed with star and memory alone. We build ships of steel where they carved hulls from trees. We search for connection in data the way they searched in sky and swell. Technology changes, desire does not. And maybe identity does not require proof. Maybe it requires recognition. When we stand by the sea and feel that ache, the pull of horizon, the sound like heartbeat, something ancient stirs. Something that remembers boats no longer floating, languages no longer spoken, maps no longer drawn. Something that whispers, "You have been here before." Evidence matters, yes, but wonder sometimes matters more. Proof builds books, wonder builds humanity. If we accept the possibility of ocean wanderers shaping early world, then we accept fluid identity, not rooted, but tidal. Not confined, but expansive. This does not diminish us. It enlarges us. Humanity becomes not a single beginning, but many. Not a linear ascent, but a braided story of cultures rising, traveling, fading, leaving traces like footprints on wet sand, clear for a moment, then gone, but never meaningless. And so we reach the next question, delicate, unsettling, necessary. If evidence remains incomplete, do we dismiss the possibility or hold it as truth of imagination? Does proof define history, or does belief shape the history we choose to see? Myths are often dismissed as stories meant for children, tales of gods and storms and golden ages that never were. But what if myth is not invention, but memory softened by time? A reflection where detail blurs, yet shape remains. A shadow cast by history, too old for language to preserve. When facts are lost, myth survives, not as record, but as echo. Consider the flood stories that appear across continents, told by people who never wrote to each other. In Mesopotamia, the world drowns and one family survives. In India, Manu is carried to safety by a fish. In the Americas, waters rise, and only those who reach high ground or sacred tree endure. If sea levels rose 12,000 years ago, swallowing coastlines, then these stories may not be allegory but recollection. The world did drown once. People watched home vanish beneath waves. How else would memory of such grief survive millennia but through myth? Sea gods may be nothing more than navigators elevated into eternity. A sailor who crossed impossible water becomes deity in telling. A crew who arrived from distant horizon becomes children of sky or serpent. When strangers vanished again into ocean, legend filled the empty space. Their absence left behind. A shipwreck becomes descent from heaven. A lost navigational technique becomes miracle. Myth preserves what history cannot explain. In Polynesia, stories speak of Hawaii, a homeland beyond horizon, real yet unreachable. In the Mediterranean, Atlantis falls beneath sea. In Ireland, High Brazil appears only once every 7 years before fading again. Perhaps these are not fantasies, but grieving maps. Places remembered dimly after tides erase them. 1,000 years after a city drowns, descendants no longer know why stories speak of shining harbours beneath waves, only that they do. Myth becomes the vessel that carries lost geography forward in time. Then there are skypath legends where ancestors travel along routes, marked not by land but by constellations. The Pleiades guide migration in the Pacific. Orion leads hunters in Africa. The same stars shape navigation, ritual, calendar across the world. Did separate cultures invent this in parallel, or inherit instructions from earlier world sailors who taught others to read the sky? Myth does not answer, but it suggests. What if myth holds truth because facts were lost? Imagine a grandmother telling her grandchild of a time when the ocean swallowed land. The child grows, repeats the story to their daughter. Generations pass. The details fade, but the sea rises again each time the tale is told. Eventually, it becomes legend, a flood sent by gods. Yet inside it lives a seed of history. People once watched the world drown. Myth is not false. It is history worn smooth like riverstone. Sharp edges erode, names dissolve, dates vanish, but essence endures. Myths are memory's last defense against forgetting. So we return to our central question not with certainty, but with tenderness. We do not claim every legend is fact, we ask whether fact once lived inside legend. If oceanic civilizations existed before written time, their stories would survive only here in gods who walk on waves, in heroes who sail into sunrise, in serpents that circle the world like currents unseen. And so we approach the final chapter, not to prove or disprove, but to leave the question open like horizon at dusk. We may never know what drowned or what travelled beyond reach, yet myth gives shape to absence, letting us see possibility where record falls silent. The last section stands ahead, like night on calm sea, an ending without closure, an answer without certainty. There comes a point where even the most patient explorer must pause, not because the journey ends, but because the horizon continues farther than they can follow tonight. We stand on that shoreline now. Beneath us lie cities we cannot yet reach, bloodlines we cannot yet decode, stories we can almost hear but not fully understand. The possibility of an ancient seafaring world sits before us like an unopened door, familiar enough to tempt, hidden enough to haunt. And we realize something enormous. We may never know the whole truth. Not in our lifetime. Perhaps not in any. History is not a library with perfect shelves. It is a tide, rising and falling, revealing and hiding. We grasp fragments and call them knowledge. We brush silt from stone and call it understanding. Yet the ocean holds more than it releases. For every artifact found, countless others have dissolved. For every myth preserved, many more have vanished like smoke. We cannot close the door behind us, because it was never closed. It was never even fully open. Perhaps proof will surface tomorrow, a diver's glove touching carved harbour stone, a scientist extracting ancient DNA from seabed sediment, a sonar sweep returning shapes too geometric for nature alone. Or, perhaps nothing will appear for centuries. Perhaps the ocean has buried its greatest stories beyond our reach forever. Both futures feel possible. Both feel profound. Certainty is not the gift this journey offers. Curiosity is. We are left with questions that breathe like wind across empty deck. Who built the drowned cities? Who charted the star paths across black water? Who carried crops where no map predicted they could go? Who spoke first across oceans, long before history learned to record a voice? We do not answer. We listen. Maybe that is the point. Not to solve, but to wonder. To understand that history is not finished, only paused, mid-sentence. The gaps are not failures of evidence. They are invitations. The silence between discoveries is space for imagination, for possibility, for the thrill of not yet knowing. If every answer were handed to us, curiosity would wither. Instead, the unknown keeps us awake, keeps us searching, keeps us human. Imagine standing alone on a beach at night. The tide is low. Stars scatter across dark water, reflections trembling on each wave. You know, ancient sailors once stared at this same sky, felt this same pull in their chest, that ache of horizon, that feeling of there is more. Their boats are gone, their stories drowned, yet you feel them as if they stand beside you, watching waves, waiting for dawn. Across thousands of years, curiosity binds you to them, like invisible rope. The ocean keeps its secrets. Are we ready to listen? The question hangs in the air like mist, refusing closure. We cannot force the tide to retreat and reveal what lies beneath. We can only wait, dive, search, wonder. The story we built does not end because evidence is incomplete. It ends because possibility remains open door ajar, light spilling through. We are left suspended like foam on a turning wave, drawn forward by something older than certainty. We may be wrong. We may be right. And in that tension, that shimmering space between doubt and hope, the narrative lives. The first people may not have been farmers, but sailors. Civilization may not have started in one place, but in many, connected by water, like nerves in a living world. But even if every submerged city remains hidden, the idea alone reshapes how we see ourselves. We become not inheritors of static land, but descendants of movement. Explorers by blood. Questioners by nature. Proof is not demanded for wonder to matter. A horizon does not need to be reached to be real. The unanswered does not weaken the story, it keeps it alive. And so we end not with conclusion, but with tide. Rising, falling, returning. A story incomplete, by design. The ocean waits. The questions wait. The door remains open, quietly, eternally. Morning begins where the sea meets silence. Light spills across water like an old story retold, gentle and familiar. Waves move with patient rhythm, touching shorelines, as if searching for footsteps long erased. You can stand on any coast in the world, Chile, Samoa, Java, Brittany, and feel it. A presence, a memory woven through salt and distance. The ocean does not speak, yet it remembers. It has carried more voices than history has written, more hopes than stone has preserved. History fades, but oceans do not forget. Before cities rose, before calendars kept time, before stone learned to echo with chisel marks, the shoreline was the first doorway. People gathered there at dawn to watch horizon glow, to wonder what lived beyond the edge of sight. Their footprints are gone now, washed smooth by centuries of tide, but the water remains the same, water returning, retreating, returning. Every wave is a repetition of something ancient. Every tide is a memory coming home. We imagine them, those early navigators standing where we stand now, hearing the same rhythm we hear. They looked outward and felt possibility stir like wind in their chest. Maybe they launched boats carved from single trees and prayed to stars that guided them across black water. Maybe they told stories around fires glowing against waves, stories of far islands or strange traders drifting from elsewhere. The sea absorbed those stories. It still carries them. The ocean remembers, not through language, but through silence. It keeps what land loses: the drowned harbours, the sunken homes, the buried hearths. Somewhere beneath this surface lies a child's toy carved from shell, a fishing hook held once by hands long dust, a harbour stone that felt rope tension and laughter. These things do not vanish. They shift downward, deeper, under layers of silt and coral, where time cannot burn them to ash. They wait, and we wait with them, though we do not always know why. Standing on the beach at dawn, we sense something beneath thought, an inheritance not spoken but felt. Curiosity, longing, recognition. Perhaps this is memory without memory, a pulse older than blood. The tides have touched every generation of humanity, from the first to now. They have watched us rise and crumble and rise again. What they took, they kept gently. What they returned in whispers. Listen long enough to waves and you feel story beneath sound. A rise, a fall like breath, a rhythm like migration. Water arrives as explorers once did, softly, without fanfare. It recedes like civilizations we discuss only in shadows. The sea does not explain. It reveals only as much as we can bear. Fog sits heavy on the horizon now, pale and luminous. The ocean beneath it is endless, but not empty. It holds every forgotten journey, every canoe that vanished into storm, every raft that drifted beyond sight, every settlement swallowed as ice melted and shorelines drowned. These are not losses, they are memory in another form, not gone, stored. History is what we can see. The ocean is everything else. And still, it moves, tide after tide, like pages turning without reader. The same water that drowned ports in India brushes Polynesian reef and Californian sand. It binds the world with a patience we rarely understand. Land divides, ocean connects. Perhaps that was always the truth, one we are only now beginning to feel. We end this section not with discovery, but with breath tidal, slow. The waves outside our window tonight are the same waves that touch the feet of forgotten sailors, the same waves that bore boats toward new worlds, the same waves that covered their ruins with gentleness, not malice. If history is the story, the ocean is the storyteller, soft-spoken, infinite. There will never be full answers, but there will always be tide, always memory, always return. Next, we reflect on why mystery matters, why not knowing is sometimes the deepest form of knowing. There is a gentle ache in unanswered questions, a space wide enough for imagination to breathe. We spend our lives collecting facts like shells, arranging them in tidy lines so the world feels manageable. But the ocean reminds us that certainty is a shoreline, not the whole earth. Beyond it lies water without map, possibility without end. What we do not know is not a void, it is a beginning. Mystery is not a flaw in history. It is the pulse that keeps us searching. To stand before an unsolved past is to feel alive. Every gap is an invitation. Every lost civilization is a doorway. If we had perfect proof of how humanity began, where it travelled, what it built, we might close the book, satisfied, finished. But uncertainty is the wind that fills the sails. Because we do not know everything, we keep asking. Because ruins lie underwater, we dive. Because myths linger like smoke on the edge of memory, we listen. The unknown is not emptiness, it is horizon. Imagine a version of history with no missing pages, no drowned cities, no vanished mariners, no symbols untranslatable. The story would be complete, brilliant, finite, and when something is finished, it stops growing. Curiosity fades. Wonder sleeps. We move on. But humanity has never thrived on completion. We thrive on questions. Our earliest ancestors followed coastlines they could not see the end of. They launched boats into darkness simply because something might be there. That instinct lives in us still. Not knowing is what makes discovery possible. We often think answers are the treasure, but sometimes the treasure is the search itself, the feeling of standing on the brink of understanding, breath held, eyes forward. There is beauty in the unfinished, in the half-remembered, in the maybe-true. A theory is a lighthouse, not a dock. It shows the way, but does not tell you where to stop. When we reach its beam, we see farther than before, and the mystery expands like new coastline. The ocean teaches this. It gives hints, a shard of pottery, a genetic thread, a myth that refuses to die, then pulls them back beneath tide, leaving us with wonder rather than certainty. Some may call this frustrating. Others feel the quiet thrill of it. A mystery unsolved keeps history alive, the way a held breath keeps a body trembling with awareness. We lean forward. We want to know more, and in that wanting, humanity continues. What if the unknown is not a void but a beginning? We do not need to prove every drowned harbour or trace every forgotten sailor for the story to matter. It matters because it reminds us that we are part of something vast and unfinished. The earth holds more secrets than we will ever uncover, and that is not tragedy, but grace. It means there will always be new questions, new divers, new thinkers watching the horizon and wondering what came before. Certainty builds walls, mystery builds doors. Perhaps the greatest evidence of our connection to ancient ocean wanderers is not in ruins or genes, but in our own restlessness, in our habit of looking past what is known toward what might be, in the way we feel the sea like a memory familiar, comforting, endlessly deep. We do not end this story because we cannot. It is not meant to end. It is meant to continue through every reader who wonders, every diver who descends, every child who hears this possibility and dreams further than fact allows. Mystery is the inheritance that asks us to keep going. And now we approach the final section, not an answer, but a hand extended toward tomorrow. A call to continue the story that began long before memory and will outlive certainty by centuries. There is a moment, near the end of a long night, when the sea and the sky become the same color. The horizon dissolves. You can't tell where one ends and the other begins, only that there is forward, and forward is everything. That is where this story leaves us. Not with certainty, but with direction. Not with proof, but with possibility. We do not know if ancient sailors crossed oceans before history learned to write, but the question remains like a mast against dawn light. It points outward. Maybe they came before us. Maybe they spread seeds across the Pacific and carved ports now drowned in blue quiet. Maybe they stood barefoot on foreign sand and spoke words that have since curled into myth. Or maybe they never reached so far, never touched other worlds, never left the blood and pottery trails we search for beneath silt. But even if they never crossed that water, the question is still powerful enough to carry us across our own. Because the true inheritance of these forgotten voyages is not evidence, it is wonder. We stand where they once stood, staring at the same waves. Our feet sink into sand smoothed by millennia of tides, sand that once held footprints we will never find. In the hush of morning when the ocean glows like liquid pearl, it is impossible not to feel them not as ghosts, but as company. Whether real or imagined, they shape us. They remind us that humanity was born of curiosity, not certainty. That the world was crossed before it was mapped. That the greatest journeys began with not knowing. Perhaps they left no record because they did not need one. Their story was written in motion, canoe wakes fading behind them as they sailed into futures that had no historian watching. They trusted horizon. They trusted wind. They trusted that what they could not see might still be worth reaching. That mindset is not lost with them. It lives now in anyone who asks, what if? It lives in divers descending to drowned cities, in scientists scanning the ocean floor for ruins older than agriculture, in dreamers who stare at stars and feel directions instead of distance. We inherit oceans they once crossed, and perhaps we are meant to follow. Imagine this ending not as closing door, but as open deck. You stand aboard a vessel the world has not yet built, staring toward a horizon history has not yet drawn. There are still continents of knowledge uncharted beneath waves, within blood, inside myth. We are not at end of story, we are at beginning of next chapter. The question they left behind, deliberate or accidental, now belongs to us. The last question is not did they come before us, but will we follow them? We may never confirm their voyages in stone or genetic sequence, but we can echo them in choice, in exploration, in imagination, in daring to leave safety of shore. Our ancestors, known or forgotten, were not defined by destinations reached, but by willingness to go, to risk calm for discovery, to trade certainty for sky and water. And now the decision returns to us, tide-like. We could demand proof final, complete, unbreakable, or we could accept the beauty of searching, the way a sailor accepts that the sea owes them no explanation. We could wait for discovery like wind in slack sails, or we could sail into uncertainty ourselves, looking for answers future centuries may thank us for finding. Out there, beyond map and sonar, lie questions older than history. Perhaps an intact harbour waits beneath 100 meters of water. Perhaps a script sleeps in darkness, bilingual and patient. Perhaps a canoe rests in silt, like a held breath. Perhaps nothing remains but memory in the salt. We will not know until someone goes, and that someone might be us. So the story ends like Horizon ends, not with line, but with invitation. The ocean holds its secrets. We hold the desire to learn them. Between those two truths lies the future. Fade into open sea unanswered. Eternal. The tide turns. The world breathes. And somewhere, beneath waves or beyond them, the next sailors are already rising.